Life is full of both challenging and beautiful moments, and the stories we tell of those times in our lives bring an opportunity to bring such encouragement and hope to those who hear them. The saying goes that we are amazed at people's achievements, but we really connect with people on their vulnerabilities. We have sat around so many tables and heard the most incredible stories of people's perseverance and victory, and our hope is that you would be encouraged on your journey as we broadcast them. This is a place where everybody's story matters. Welcome to the Journey Podcast. Whitney.
Hey.
Welcome to the Journey Podcast.
So exciting.
I'll say podcast for you because you're American.
Yes, podcast.
Yeah. Welcome to the Journey Podcast. And it's just such a privilege to be here for this first episode. Just feeling a little teary earlier, just thinking about it and all the Lord has done just to bring me to this place. But it's so wonderful to have you here. Whitney's a really good friend of ours. Whitney and her husband, Nate, and their two dogs who are literally our little dogs, older sister and brother.
Yes.
And just tell us a little about yourself first.
Yeah, so my name is Whitney Jameson, and I met you guys, or you and your husband, Fred, when we moved to the same state, which is Florida. And it was just so sweet to meet you guys. I'm a marriage and family therapist. That's what I do for my job. My husband's into marketing and kind of helping businesses and brands and things like that. And so that's a little bit about me. I'm a Christian. I love Jesus, and that's something else that we bond in our friendship.
Yeah. Actually, I remember the first time we met, and it was at church. And I have this thing, like we are actually involved in a church plant before this, and I really had to learn not to come on too strongly. And so your first visit at our church, I saw you guys, and I was like, oh, like someone I could be friends with. And I walked up to you, and I was like trying to act like kind of chilled, and then afterwards I was like, oh my word, they're never going to come back. That was like way too strong.
That's so
But
funny.
look at us, we're still friends.
It is, but I remember that moment, and that was not my experience of you. I thought you were just so sweet and welcoming, and that's actually exactly what my husband and I needed.
Well, I'm glad that we didn't chase you.
Yeah. No, you're part of the reason why we're still at that church. So,
thanks.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted actually today to be a little bit more about myself. And so I invited Whitney because you've really been someone, especially in the last year, who's journeyed with me just through kind of helping me just to place things in my own heart. And I found so much freedom in this past year. But because you know so much of my story, I wanted you to be part of the first episode to kind of just help to just give an overview of my life and my heart for the podcast. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, I feel honored that you've invited me into your life and that I've been able to journey with you in this last year and a half. And just to see God's work in your story has been astounding. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, obviously we have different accents. So why don't you tell me a little bit about where you're from and a little bit about you?
Yes. So my name is Denise, and I'm actually from South Africa. I was born in a city called Port Elizabeth, which is along the East Coast. And I met my husband. I was part of a Christian school that was kind of like attached to the church that we went to, Harvest Christian Church. And my dad was a doctor until I was 10 years old, and then he actually became the senior pastor of the church. And so I've been a pastor's kid for most of my life. I'm the youngest of 4 children. I have 2. My oldest sibling is Mark. He's my oldest brother. He's actually pastoring the church back home now.
Oh, cool.
And then my sister Susan, and then James, and myself. Denise.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and then
that's another commonality we have. We're both the youngest.
I know. Youngest kids.
So we basically have a lot of fun together. Yeah. That's what that means.
Yeah. And so, I grew up in Port Elizabeth and went to youth. I've always really loved church. My parents just gave such a real example of what it was to walk in just a Christian journey with the Lord. I don't ever remember them telling us, you mustn't do this, you mustn't do this. I just remember them giving us a taste for what life looked like in Christ. And I had absolutely no need to look outside of that.
Yeah.
And obviously, not a perfect person, but I did grow up just really loving the Lord and just really having a good experience of church. And even as my dad became a pastor, they were always really good at prioritizing the family. And so I know that many people's story is not that.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I know that there's many people who experience just always playing second fiddle to the church when your parents are in ministry. But I just always really loved it. I had a very real experience of the Holy Spirit from a young age. I've always felt close to the Lord. And obviously, I think in seasons as I've gotten older, if you go through difficult times, I think sometimes I've been like, okay, Lord, like, where are you?
Yeah.
But just growing up, just had a really good family, siblings that really loved me. It was, very good. And then met Fred, who's actually on the other side of this camera. Hey.
The TV magic.
Yeah, he's the TV magic. He actually has an amazing company. I'll give a shout out to Kingdom Creatives. That's been amazing just how the Lord's put it all together. But we met when I was 16, actually.
Young.
Young. Yes. Pastor's child. I feel bad for him now when I think back on that. That's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
But we really just took it slow. He actually spoke to my dad and we just...
And what's the age difference between you two?
There's 4 years, so he was 20.
Okay.
Yep. He was actually doing the worship academy at our church.
Yeah.
He had come in a little late and really felt like God needed him to be there.
Yeah.
But, just amazingly, the woman, Ingrid, who was running it with her husband, Andrew, they just felt like the Lord wanted him to be there.
Yeah.
So that was really good. And so we got to know each other that way. Obviously involved in the same youth. He was friends with my brother.
Yeah.
So thanks, James, for...
And how
letting
long
me
did
marry
you
your
guys,
friend.
How long did you guys date before you got engaged?
So we took it really slowly. So we never officially dated, but I count those years because
we were 16.
Yeah, I was 16 exactly. But we were committed to each other, and we weren't playing games. Like I really didn't want to go out with a bunch of people to find the right one I wanted.
Yeah.
So we kind of had this thing of, okay, we're together and let's have no regrets. So if this had to end, then I would leave you better off than how you were when I met you.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our heart. And it was always relationship pulling together, allowing the Lord to, just really lead us.
Yeah.
And so it was, I think it was 4.5 years. And then I actually called it off.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fred says that we never broke up because he had no part in it.
You left him.
He said I lost my way.
Yeah.
But we do both agree that whatever the Lord did in that time was very significant.
Yeah.
And so we did actually break up. After I'd finished high school, he spoke to my dad again and we started holding hands and sitting next to each other at church and just, officially dating.
Yeah.
And I actually did... I studied beauty therapy, which I guess here they'll call it cosmetology, but I never did hair. People think that I can cut hair, but I can't.
Oh, okay.
It was run of the mill stuff, skin, all of that. I always wanted to be in ministry.
Yeah.
But, that was something I knew the Lord would have to open the door to.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I needed something. And I love people. I really do. I really love people. And so it was kind of this job where I could work for myself. I could have the kids and... I worked from my parents' home, which was really nice. But so in between all of that, we did break up and then got back together again after 2 months.
Yeah.
But whatever the Lord did in that time, I think for me as the youngest child, and I say that I'm a recovering people pleaser, but I tend to I would tend to struggle with making a stand for myself. I would kind of always just trust someone who was older than me, that they knew better, Yeah. And for me to say, okay, this is actually what I'm feeling, and to know that I was going to hurt him in the process, which was never my heart, it was empowering for me to make that stand and to know that I was going with what I had peace about and not just sticking with something because it would have hurt him otherwise, And what the Lord did in him was he really found God as a father, I think, in that time. And, there were people who really supported him. And, my oldest brother actually really walked us both through that.
Yeah.
Fred ended up working for my oldest brother.
Wow.
So he played quite a key part in just helping us navigate that season. And obviously it was super awkward because we were in worship together. We were in the same church, leading like youth together, all of the same friends. But somehow we managed.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like a lot of the themes and hobbies that you guys kind of bonded over was ministry and church and worship and, you know, all of those kind of elements and, you know, both kind of going on your own journey.
Yes.
Before finally, you know, kind of saying yes to each other and committing.
And I think if we hadn't had that, if we were both not 100% certain that God had put us together, it would have made it really hard later on because, I mean, I'll get into it, but immigrating and all of that was difficult.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think we always just went back to, we knew that it was obedience, that the Lord had put us together for a purpose, and it was greater than just how we felt about each other.
Yeah.
And so that really helped when, on the days when it was hard, and you're like, oh my gosh, like, you know, what are we doing? This is so hard. But to go back and say, no, like, there's no doubt in our hearts that God put us together. And so you just keep showing up faithful. So we did. We'd broken up and we got back together. And then, and just going back to what you'd said about what had kind of brought us together in the first place, I've always felt like him and I are so different in many ways, but I've always felt like we're kind of wired the same.
Most couples are.
Yeah, most couples are. You taught me that, actually. Yes, you do tend to hook up with a partner that is kind of opposite to you, but I always felt like at the heart of it, we were wired the same. And I've been so grateful for that we really appreciate like authenticity, even in church as we've led together. I can look at him across the room and we just know each other so well. We know what feels true, what is integrity, what is on our hearts. And we've never had to fight about those things. So I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, you guys have shared so much history together.
Yeah,
right?
we really
From
have.
16 onward.
Yeah.
Fred has always kind of been a part of your life.
Yes.
So, okay, so you guys got married, or you got engaged. We got back together.
I know. I actually had gone to Australia for 6 weeks. We'd gotten back together and I turned 21. And then I went to Australia for 6 weeks to help a church. Like,
so you were back together when you went to Australia.
together. Yeah. And then I had my 21st birthday. And then, like, a few days after that, went to Australia for 6 weeks. And I'm like a golden retriever. I'm like, I love my people and need my people. Yeah. And it was the first time, like, I never liked sleeping out as a kid. And even now people are like, let's go away for the weekend, all the woman. And I'm like, okay.
More of a homebody.
Yeah. I like my family. I like us all being together. And I think especially even after leaving all the family in South Africa and moving to the States, I just like us being together. Yeah. And so we got, I left for 6 weeks, and that was quite radical for me, just to be like removed from everybody for 6 weeks. Anyway, in that time, he did make a ring with his grandmother's diamond.
Oh, sweet.
Which was very sweet.
Very sentimental.
So sentimental. And I never got to meet her. So that it just felt really special. Yeah. She was a big part of his life. So that was really nice. So we got engaged the day I got back.
Okay. Beautiful.
4 months later, we were married.
He was excited.
He was very excited. I know. I almost fell off the rocks. He proposed at Skuni's, like Schoenmakerskorp, which is, that's a nice Dutch word for you. Yeah. But it was down at the beach, and he went down on one knee, and I was so surprised. I don't even remember. I just remember like, oh my word.
Yeah, yes! You were so excited.
I know, like crying and laughing. It was amazing.
Oh, what a special moment.
And then we got married on the 28th of September. Yeah. It was exactly 5 years after we'd had the first conversation. Yeah. That we liked each other.
Yeah. So this time, your husband Fred is working for the church, and you're in beauty school and...
Well, no, he actually wasn't working for the church then. Okay. Yeah. Until we moved to America, we were both like volunteering at the church, just serving. Yeah. And he was in IT actually. Okay. So he had studied IT and also wanted to go into ministry. And we were both, I mean, I think, when you're young like that, you just think the door's just going to open for you,
Yeah, you oversimplify it.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of merit in working a job, because you have a lot of understanding for what it is to hold on a job, to serve, to have a family. because now obviously we have a lot of people who serve with us. And I think it's helped just to really appreciate the sacrifice that people make.
Right.
And to have an understanding just of real world and to touch and to be with people who are in the world. And because I think you can become like a little bubble sometimes in church, especially when you're leading.
Yeah.
It can be isolating.
Yeah.
And you're so focused on the sheep, and actually, you know, it's good to do that.
Yeah.
So he was actually in IT and really wanted to be in ministry. And I was working, I had my own little spa, just working for myself from my parents' home.
Yeah.
And those years were so significant. They were hard because it kind of felt like we were hidden in a way. Like we would see people, you know, come in and get positions that we were dreaming of.
Like within the church?
Within the church. Fred had really felt like the Lord wanted us that we would move to the States. I mean, even from a kid, he was like wanting to play ice hockey.
Yeah.
He would, when we first got married, there would be like the Super Bowl, and I'd have to buy him the most American snacks that I could from Port Elizabeth.
Oh, cute.
And he would sit up at like 2 a.m. in the night, like eating his snacks and watching the Super Bowl.
That's so interesting. It's like interesting to see other people in different countries like think of what they like. What do you think of the U.S.?
I know.
So it's like fascinating.
Pretzels and Pepsi.
Yeah. So that's cool. So you guys kind of had the U.S. on your heart for years.
Yes. And especially Fred at first, I had no desire to leave South Africa. And in fact,
you were a homebody.
I was a homebody, and I lived within a few blocks of all my family.
Yeah.
You know, there were grandkids, like cousins for my children, and we never left because we were unhappy. I think that's the misconception. I think people, and we were sometimes misunderstood in that. People think that we left because we were scared, or we didn't like the country, or we never had any hope for the country. We did. We just had this longing that the Lord called us. And I don't know why God does that. I don't know why he moved us away from that comfort and from being around family. But I know that in hindsight, the Lord could never have done what he has done in our hearts and continues to do, right? Because we continue the journey. If we had stayed, I think being the youngest, Fred coming into our family, I think we needed to leave and cleave to each other. And we had been married for 10 years before we moved. Yeah. But there was something in that separating, and it was traumatic. It was hard to leave. But in between that, while I was working, we had our first child, Jenna, and I kept with the salon, and then had John, and just went through all of that, like, the colic and the lack of sleep, being a new mom,
trying to work,
hormones, really trying to make ends meet. I remember times just like crying out to the Lord, like, oh my word, God, we need provision in this, and having no clients lined up, and just seeing miracles of that, and really learning to trust the Lord with his provision. Right. Because we did. We saw amazing things. There would be times when, you had a doctor's bill or whatever, and someone would call and say, hey, I'm down from Johannesburg, and can you give me the works? And I'd be like, trying not to act like a psycho on the other side of the phone, like, yes, oh my gosh. like, sure, you can come in at 9 if it suits you. And just seeing like the Lord's hand in all of that. And I think at the time, I felt so disappointed in God, because I'd always felt, I always knew his favor. And then having to really see like, wow, nothing changes the character of God. He's always good. He's always kind. And in that season of really struggling with provision, not seeing his hand on our dreams, just being like, wow, Lord, like we put our hand up so long ago. And
dreams meaning like ministry in the US.
Ministry, wanting to be, feeling like he was calling us to something more. There was something that we weren't seeing. And it turns out that feeling never really goes away, because I think you always have that like feeling in your heart, like, what more, God, what are you calling us to next? But, just feeling in that season like the Lord really grew something inside of us. And then it got to the point where we actually just both, without even knowing it, laid down that dream of being in full-time ministry, moving to America.
And that was like years later.
Like that was like about 6 years later. Okay. We had come over just before Jenna was born, actually. she was actually conceived in America, so we call her our
Beautiful.
American dream girl because
she needed to go back home.
She needed to go back home.
Yeah.
So we came over to visit and cried when we left. And in fact, some of the words that we had, and sometimes with prophetic words, you hear it the way that you want to hear it. Mm-hmm. So someone had said, we feel like the Lord's called you here. It's going to be within a year. And all of this. And so we went back. We were like, we're going to be here in a year.
Yeah.
And I don't know what we were thinking. Like, who was going to just like, yo, guys, you're ready to make a move. Like, we didn't, the people that we knew here, they weren't in a position to bring us over.
Right.
But in that time, that seed always has to die, and you can't fake the death. It's like, you can say like, Lord, you can have it all and I surrender it all to you. But it's not until that seed. And for us, that seed had to fall to the ground many, many times. And we had to let go of holding on to that.
Right.
And
I think sometimes like those dreams can become an idol.
Yes.
Sometimes.
Totally.
And it's like when that dies, it's like God can give you what he has for you.
Yes.
And it's a painful, I kind of call it like a painful, holy heart work.
Yeah. It's so painful. And
but the fruit is beautiful.
It is. Yeah.
It's a hard journey.
Yes. And it needed to happen in both of us. And I think once that seed really died and our hope became in Jesus and not in our hopes and dreams.
Or the outcome.
Or the outcome. Because at the end of the day, and the more I live, the more I realize the Lord is really after our hearts. Mm-hmm. And he cares way more about what is going on below and beneath the surface than he does above it. Yeah. And we can do all the things that we think, we can think, oh, if I can just be in full-time ministry, if I can just have the kids, if I can just have all these things, like get the house and do this and move. And this is when we're going to really start living.
Yeah.
I think I've really learned that is actually not what the Lord is after. He's really after our hearts. And you can do all of those things. But if our hearts are not after him, if it's not done in the name of Jesus, and we are not content to be at home and miss out on those meetings, because I struggled with that, staying home, missing out on the conferences, not being able to be involved in stuff. I think all those things had to die. And then one day when we had truly let it down, we got a call from Greg and Irma, who had been pastors at our home church.
Yeah.
And they were like, okay, guys, when you're coming over. And we were like, oh my word, that is a sick joke.
Yeah. You were skeptical.
Yeah. And then actually we did. And to look back on the prophetic word we'd had, it was a year from when they called us on the phone to when we received our visas.
Okay.
And so we moved over to Chicago. And I think in that move, we had young kids. Jenna was 5, John was 2.
Yeah.
And in that process, it's really tough to move countries with kids. And so we moved over and
so I have a question.
Yes.
Right. When the pastors in, I think it was Chicago.
Yes.
Where you guys first lived here, right? And they kind of welcomed you over, had an opportunity for you guys over, and that was kind of your green card, so to speak, of coming over. What was the reaction from your family when you guys decided, hey, we're going to do this?
Yeah.
We're going to move countries. And
so
we're going to leave.
Yeah.
Because I know your family is very tight-knit and you all love each other deeply.
Yes.
And that would be a big, that's a big life transition.
Yeah. I think the thing that marked me the most was that, especially with my parents, I could tell that it was so hard for them. And I knew it like broke them in us going. But to see wow, that is fatherhood. Like to see them release us.
Yeah.
And there was absolutely no animosity in their hearts. There was no bitterness. There was no manipulation.
Yeah.
There was no...
it seemed like they just blessed you.
They blessed us in our going.
Blessed and released you.
Yes, they blessed and released us. And I knew it was hard. I knew it was really hard.
Yeah.
And, to see our kids, they haven't had the opportunity of growing up with cousins in the same town. I've had to watch everyone go on camping trips that I grew up doing. Those are the things that are very hard. And I think that remains the greatest sacrifice in moving. Having all of your family, Fred's family back home. His mom doesn't have any other grandkids. We've got the 2 grandkids and we're living,
in a different country.
24 hours to get back. It's you can't just hop on a plane. It's not easy.
Right.
But so I think that's...
So it was, I mean, it's hard with transitions like that, though, because even though there's so many mixed feelings.
Yes.
Because even though it's exciting and, this is almost an obedience to God, there's also losses.
Yes,
right?
a lot
like
of loss.
You're saying, right? The loss of accessibility, right? You kind of lose that.
Yeah, and even there's time zones.
Yeah.
There's, we had 10 years worth of stuff that we collected, kids' things.
Yeah.
I'm incredibly sentimental, had to get rid of all of that.
Yeah.
And so, so then in moving, we arrived in the States, and I think then really came face to face with just what it was then to be in full-time ministry. And so just to kind of skip ahead, and I realized like with this podcast, there's going to be so many opportunities to share, like to take more of a deep dive into some of the specific themes. And I'm going to get Fred on the podcast. He needs to be on because we have a lot of stories to tell. But
absolutely.
I think just realizing we sat around so many tables.
Yeah.
And that's actually where I developed my love of cooking. I love cooking for people and feeding them.
Yes, she's very good at it too.
Oh, you're also a good cook.
Yeah.
I almost broke out into an accent there. My husband was like, if you have Whitney, you're not allowed to speak in an accent, because we kind of have this thing where we speak in an accent.
Yes, it's true.
And we've done pretty well.
We're being very professional.
We're being so professional right now.
Even though this is casual, we're being casually professional.
We're being professional.
Yeah.
It's because Fred's keeping me accountable on the other side there.
Yeah.
Just reminding me, no accents, lady.
I don't know if everyone appreciates our accents as much as we do. Yeah.
We do. But anyway, so we just sat around all these tables and had so many people for dinners, and we would hear the most incredible stories. And it's like there were times when we felt like down in the ditch, just so discouraged and despondent, and like, God, did you lead us out here to destroy us?
Yeah.
And we would sit around a table and share our story of how the Lord had brought us to America with all the miracles that had happened. And we would hear their stories. And it's like that scripture that speaks about we overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony.
Yeah.
And that just became like we would walk away and say, these stories need to be told. And so even in this podcast, it's been a long time coming, because we've really felt like everybody's story matters.
Yeah.
And we're never going to kill storytelling. If you look at the Hebrew culture, they tell stories. And I've even found in my life, I tell my kids stories about my family because I want them to know. Because if they were in South Africa sitting around the table, they would be hearing stories about how, grandpa did this thing, or, granny did this, or this is where they grew up, or stories of my siblings and what we did. And so I tell those stories because it's part of our family legacy. It's part of our heritage and what makes us who we are. The same with Fred's family. And so, but just in closing, because I don't want to take up too much time on the podcast. It's like when you're starting a podcast, like how much time do you have someone's attention for? So if you're still listening, thanks for tracking with us.
This is so funny because I'm also the podcast person that I can listen to like half-hour ones, but I'm also the one that can listen to like 4 hours.
Yes, I know. It's like how grabbing are we?
I am. Yeah, so you got my attention still.
I know. I'm like, I'm enjoying my own story right now.
Yeah, it's a great story, yeah.
So, so just coming to this point, I think if I could go back in the immigration, I would have loved to have put myself through counseling, because I think just in my personality and in being a pastor's kid and then being a leader in a church, and even now still being a leader in the church, I do care so deeply about people, and I'm such a feeler. And I think I took on a lot of responsibility for other people's feelings, and kind of felt growing up, if somebody was unhappy with the church or a decision that was being made, it made me afraid. Like I didn't want to make anyone upset. Especially moving to Chicago, like what if somebody leaves because of me? Because I never cared enough, or, and so my boundaries, I really struggled with boundaries. And that's a journey that I'm obviously still on. Is to know where do I end and the next person begins. But in ministry, like what would Jesus do? Like how do I love people with a genuine heart? Because God has made me the way that I am. But like my dad's always said, your weakness goes hand in hand with your greatest strength. And so I think my greatest strength is that I am empathetic, I am sensitive, I love very deeply. But the weakness on that is that I can be sensitive and overly empathetic, and you can kind of take it on yourself.
Really involved,
and just wanting to really like organize things to keep people happy. And so I'm really having to learn that, because I want to love people genuinely. But But yeah, just kind of came to the end of myself last year, discovered through my daughter, who said it was totally fine that I said this, that she had, just developed anxieties. And we can get more into all of that in the future. But just developing anxieties in the move when so many things feel so out of control, and how our limbic system really kind of overfires in that.
Which our limbic system is our threat alert system.
Yes.
Right? So just even the amount of changes, like our brain loves familiarity.
Yes.
So just thinking about your guys' move where it literally impacts every area of your life. Like there's no area that's not touched.
No, every area was affected.
It's so unfamiliar. So you guys had so much to process just moving over. Yeah.
And you have no history with people, although we knew like the pastors that we came to join, we had no history. All the friends that you're making are from scratch. But just kind of with my own journey of anxiety and kind of taking Jenna to you for help and laying down myself and realizing, I actually can't help her. I don't have the tools to be able to really help her sufficiently.
Yeah.
And kind of laying that down and bringing her to you. And then in walking with her through that, discovering, wow, actually, I've got some problems.
Don't we all?
I am not in a good place. And so just like how you really helped me. And I'd always felt like people would throw a book or, give encouragement or pray. And I'd taken everything spiritually and taken it all to fight in the spiritual. But actually, this was a physical thing I needed to heal in my mind. And that scripture that says, we need to renew our minds. Actually, it's metanoia, which means to change your mind. It's actually like a repentance. And so you really came in, and I felt like you just like climbed down into my little well that I was sitting in, and gave me tools and helped me to see so clearly. And so, so this past year just got really inquisitive about my own journey, and I look forward to sharing that more with all of you. But I kind of just took a little quiet seat this past year, and just got really inquisitive about why I would feel certain things in certain situations, why I was struggling so much just in my mind, and really getting to very low places. And through just a series of events and just discovering things about myself and losing that shame, because I think when you do grow up with a good family and you have a good husband, one can feel a lot of shame for having a hard time. So so
well, I think and I think that your story and your journey will relate to a lot of people, right? Like for me personally, I don't know what it's like to move across the country, but I do know what it's like to move across the United States.
Yeah, and that's basically like moving countries, because we have done that. We moved from Chicago to Florida, and it's like moving countries.
Yeah, and I think that, sometimes within our lives, it isn't until we have some of those shifts and changes that we don't fully understand the impacts of them all.
Yes.
Until we take some time and to kind of unpack.
Yeah, and it wasn't until, and I think it's until like the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain that you're going to go through in the change, because it was painful to change and let go of control and things. Yeah. But I just couldn't stay the same any longer. So that brings us to this first episode, where just so grateful for what the Lord has done in this last year. And I always said to God, everything, he uses everything. Yeah. And so if my story and the stories of those around me who've encouraged me and through their own journeys can bring encouragement to wherever this lands, wherever you are listening to this, just to know that, God does hold you, and our stories matter, and nothing's hidden from him. Even those times where, you're sitting on the bathroom floor in the middle of the night and you're anxious and or whatever, you just think that there's no way out.
Right.
That's, that the Lord is our encourager. And so, just in closing, just to be encouraged and to really hope that this podcast and the episodes that are going to come from all of this will just really breathe life and be what it was like for me and my husband sitting around those tables, our children hearing those stories and being encouraged to carry on. Because I know that if we hadn't had those dinners, we could have stayed in those pits for a lot longer. Yeah. Just staying discouraged and hopeless.
It makes life less isolating.
It does.
Yeah. When you start hearing the hard in other people's lives and how God showed up in the hard.
Exactly. And you can be so enamored and like amazed by people's accomplishments, and people can look at your pictures on Facebook and go, oh my gosh, you're living in America and it's all amazing. But when we get vulnerable and we share our vulnerabilities, that's how you connect with people. Yeah. That's how you and I've connected.
Right.
on our weaknesses because we all have them.
We don't have weaknesses.
No, you don't have any. I was kind of a mess.
But that is true. We
true.
do connect in our weaknesses and our limitations. Yeah, absolutely.
So thank you so much for coming today.
I
haven't even drunk any of my tea.
My tea is very delicious.
My husband got us these nice cups because they had a nice pop of color for the set.
They're very nice.
So cheers to episode number 1. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Journey podcast. I hope that you were encouraged and that you would have a really great week just reflecting on what we've spoken about today. If you have a story that you feel needs to be shared to encourage those who listen, please would you write a comment in the comment section below and we will reach out to you via email. Thanks for joining us and we look forward to the next episode of the Journey podcast next week.